Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. Today I'm going to be talking about my February wrap-up for the Horror Challenge. I have a playlist, which I'll link in the description box, to my Horror Challenge. I have a whole video dedicated to kind of talking about the challenge itself. And then I've already done one wrap-up that was for January, in case you missed that last month. That'll also be in that playlist. Okay, let's get into February's picks. So continuing in the paranormal section, last month I completed the Ghosts and Spirits. This month was focused on Haunted House. So I read a total of 5 books. First was The Grip of It by Jack Jims. This book is about a young, newly married couple who purchase their first house and move in. And when they move in, strange things start happening. So this was my favorite book of the bunch that I read. I really liked the unsettling atmosphere. You know, there wasn't a lot of jump scares, although there were some creepy things that were happening. I would say this was more of a psychological haunting rather than like a physical haunting. But don't get me wrong, there was, like I mentioned, definitely some creepy parts, so it did kind of go there in some spots, so. Next is 12 Nights at Waterhouse by J.W. Arker. This is about Felix, who is a writer, and he's kind of known for visiting famous haunted places and then writing about his experience. He doesn't really kind of believe in hauntings and ghosts and all of that. So next on his list is the Rotterdam Mansion, in which he decides to stay 13 nights on the premise. He invites his friend Thomas kind of along for the ride, but the two definitely get more than they bargained for. Okay, so this wasn't bad. It was just okay for me. Obviously from the title, you know that Felix only makes it 12 nights. But my gripe with this book is that I thought it took far too long for the first incident to occur. You know, a house with so much history and knowing that they're spending kind of a short period of time in the house. I was expecting a lot more activity early on. However, I will say that I'm glad that the author made the decision to have more than one person in the house. Felix and Thomas had some differing opinions and views on, kind of hauntings and ghosts and supernatural and paranormal, and they're both very, subject matter experts on the horror genre, so there's a lot of talk about horror, and even, like, within movies and all that stuff, they had very differing opinions, so I think it gave it more of kind of that, is it reality that's happening? Is it paranormal? Like, what's really happening? So that was kind of an interesting take to it, and I will say that the ending did catch me off guard. I was not expecting that kind of an ending. So next is Remains by Andrew Cole, which follows Lucy Campbell, who is released from the psychiatric hospital where she has been recovering following a breakdown after the death of her young son. When she is released, she returns to the house where her young son died, only to find it is not quite as abandoned as she thought. So, first, I want to say that In the beginning of the book, the author actually states that although this is a piece of fiction, it is loosely based on some real events, and he kind of goes on to talk about, what those events are and kind of how he came to hear of the real events. So it was pretty interesting and something I certainly didn't realize when I purchased the book. Secondly, I want to say that Andrew Cole is actually a horror director, and he's known for the horror movie The Possession of David O'Reilly. I watched that after reading this book, and I mean, the two are not, related in any way, but I did watch that after reading this, and although I'm not going to really talk about it later when we discuss movies, I would recommend it. I think it was very well done. So Remains is actually Andrew's debut novel, and one very well debut, I might add. What I liked most about it is the author's kind of discussion of horror elements from the paranormal, as well as horror elements just in human nature. The murder of a young boy is in itself something absolutely horrific, and that happens even before the paranormal kind of takes over. So the grief and that both parents are dealing with and their loss is tough to read, but I think it just adds this kind of somber, just overwhelming tone to the novel, which just makes those paranormal elements feel that much heavier. And I will say it was pretty creepy kind of from start to finish, so it's a pretty short book, so I would definitely recommend this one. Next is The Elementals by Michael McDowell. So this is about two families, the McCrays and the Savages, who travel to Belgium every summer. Isolated from the city, there are 3 houses. So one is for the McCrays, one is for the Savages, and there's one that sits empty. And it's abandoned, but not really abandoned. One summer following an interesting funeral, Luther McCray and his daughter India travel with the rest of the family to Belgium, kind of looking forward to enjoying the sun and family time, but the third house has another plan. Okay, so I will say that this does have some pretty creepy elements to it, which I did appreciate because it kind of offset the stuff that I was not enjoying. The real downer for me was the relationship between Luther and Indiana. Luther and India. If I remember the book correctly, I think India was like 12 or 13. But some of the discussions she was having with her father felt a lot older and just kind of awkward, I think, to talk with your child that young. He's talking about like having sex with her mother, and then her mother getting pregnant, even though they used protection, and her mother was kind of a whore after that. Like, why are you even telling your kid this? It's so awkward. But the book gets a lot of raving reviews, and I think it actually has a 4 average rating on Goodreads. So, I guess I'm definitely below the norm with this book. So I would still say check it out if you're interested, but I only gave it like 3 stars. And lastly, I read The Graveyard Apartment by Mariko Kayoki. This is about a family who moves into an apartment building next to a graveyard. Seemingly at first, the whole thing sounded kind of too good to be true, and as strange things start happening, they kind of start to understand why it was too good to be true. This was just another okay read for me. I felt like it was a little slow to get started. But I feel like the bigger disappointment for me is just the repetition. There's a lot of creepy things that happen, but it's the same strange things that are happening. It doesn't seem to gain in strength. It's just the same thing happening to the same people, to new people. So, I mean, that was kind of a bummer for me. I will say, if you like kind of an open ending, you would probably like this one. There didn't seem to be much resolution, which I think is something different in a lot of haunted house books, you know, especially in movies and stuff. There's kind of like that wrap up at the end that this book really didn't have. Also, I would say that this is a translated work, and I saw a lot of reviews talking about the translation being bad. I didn't get that sense, but just in knowing a little bit about Japanese culture, I think some of the verbiage and actions are common to the culture and not a translation issue. So I don't know if that's what some of the translation stuff that people were talking about, but I didn't really get that sense. So Mariko Kayoki is a very popular Japanese horror author, and I would like to check out some of her other work. And again, it definitely didn't end how I thought it would, so I will give props for that. Okay, so that's all the books. Let's talk about the haunted house movies that I watched. So first is We Are Still Here, which is a 2015 film about a couple dealing with the loss of their son. They move into a new house, kind of hoping to get like a fresh start in a small town. But this house, they find out, is still occupied. So I had actually never heard of this movie, but I did really like the small town feel to it. And I have to admit, the occupants are pretty trippy. So next was the Ambivale Horror. And yes, this movie is on this list. And it's one of the movies that I can't believe I really haven't seen yet. You know, I know about the history and the story of the house, and I just have never watched any of the movies. So for this one, I watched the original, which I want to say came out in the 70s. I think it was like 1979. And, you know, after watching it, I mean, I understand why this is a classic. And I think of all the examples that I have, this one, for me, is kind of the most true haunted house, where it actually seems like it's the house that has the personality to it. Let's see. Next, I got Relic, which I think is a newer movie. I think it was actually 2020. This is about Edna, who goes missing, and Edna's daughter and granddaughter come to her house to try to find her, but they find something darker. So I remember watching this trailer when it first came out, so I'm glad I got to watch it. It was pretty trippy, but had the weirdest ending I have ever seen in a movie. Afterwards, I literally sat in my room and I was like, what the hell just happened? I actually had to go back and rewatch it just to make sure it was actually that creepy. But, so if you're going to watch it, I mean, you could at least just watch it just to see the ending, because I think you'll be surprised. And the last movie I have for this list is Winchester. This is about Sarah Winchester, who is the owner to the Winchester Mansion, known for its strange building size and shape. Dr. Eric Price is recruited by board members of Winchester Arms to stay with Sarah Winchester and determine if she is still fit to inherit the fortune and continue running the business. But he soon learns that she is not all that crazy people are making her out to be. So, again, pretty trippy stuff happening. And while I do know some of the, actual Winchester Mansion, I don't know much about Sarah herself, so I can't really talk on, how historically accurate this was. But I thought it was an okay movie. Helen Mirren, who plays Sarah Winchester, did a great job. But some of the things with the doctor, I kind of felt like didn't need to be in the movie. It was like they were just trying to stretch it out. But, all in all, not that bad. I would probably rewatch at some point. So let's get into my recommendations. So for my book recommendations, first I have Killtree by Scott Thomas. This is about 4 masters of horror who are invited to stay at the house on Halloween night. So I think this book has a good mix of creepy house vibes with that classic kind of horror genre talk. The 4 masters of horror are authors and kind of all have done something different for the genre. So it was interesting to kind of just hear from all of those perspectives. Home Before Dark by Riley Cider, which is my favorite Riley so far. Maggie inherits Baneberry Hall after the death of her father. She returns to the house to get it ready to sell. Baneberry Hall was made famous by her father's book, which was a nonfiction, and he basically told the story of how it's haunted and all the stuff that he saw, which is something Maggie never remembers as a child and never really believed that it was haunted. But once she's there, she starts to question whether her father was right. So I really enjoyed this. It's part, good old haunted house horror mixed with some mystery thriller vibes. I think one thing Riley does good is he takes a lot of those classic tropes and just has fun with them. There were some definitely new things that happened as far as the haunting itself, but still a really good book. I really liked this one. Next I have Nyptophobia by Christopher Fowler. This is about Callie, a young student who marries Mateo and moves into the Hyperion house, which is in southern Spain. Callie starts to get drawn to the dark parts of the house and all of its secrets. So, in case you're unfamiliar, Nyptophobia is the fear of the dark. And I will say that this book definitely gets that fear vibe spot on. Also, I will say again, if you like a little bit of an open ending and not quite so clear and kind of have that clear set narrative, this would be a really good read for you. And lastly, I have The Vanishing by Wendy Webb. Julia is offered the job as caretaker to Amaris Sinclair, a famous horror novelist, and one who was believed to be dead. Julia arrives at the estate and starts to wonder about all the strange things happening. So I've seen this argued that it's not really horror, but I think it is. I mean, it's definitely more of a slow burn, kind of unsettling horror narrative rather than like a super intense, high action, anxiety driven narrative. And of course it has a really good gothic estate setting. So can't go wrong with that. Let's see. So let's get into the movies. So first on my list to recommend is Poltergeist. I mean, I can't not include this. The acting is a little scary at times, and some of the special effects are cheesy, some are great, but you know, it is a classic. I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House is about Lily, who is a live-in nurse, and she's hired to care for Iris Blum, an elderly author. This is a Netflix original, and I actually really enjoy this. It's not super scary, and again, it's kind of that slow burn narrative. There's not a lot of dialogue. It's just kind of creepy camera angles, slow building sense of dread. The main character, Lily herself, kind of narrates in the background since there's not a lot of dialogue, which makes it feel kind of like a story rather than a movie. Next, I have Session 9, which I know is not actually a house, and it's set in an insane asylum, but I am including it, and I think it's very underrated, and one of my favorites. So, an asbestos crew is hired to clean up an abandoned asylum, but soon the new crew start to experience what the residents went through. Again, kind of a slow doom, but I love the ending of this movie. I thought it was very well done, very fantastic, really messes kind of with your mind, which I would assume and would be expecting to happen with a movie that's set in kind of like a haunted insane asylum. And lastly is Crimson Peak. This to me is gothic horror at its best, but you know, I would expect nothing less from Guillermo del Toro. Edith marries the very charming Sir Thomas Sharp and moves in with him and his sister, Lady Lucille. They live in a remote mansion known as Crimson Peak in the hills, which has its own secrets to uncover. When I first watched this, I thought the twist was really good, and I did really enjoy the cast. I thought all of them did very well in the parts that they were meant to play. And, oh my god, Lady Sharp is definitely something from your nightmares. Okay, so that's all the recommendations. Let's talk just haunted houses. I think of all the horror that I've dipped into, the haunted house subgenre is one of those that are the easiest to pick out in books, without even reading the synopsis, because there is one consistent thing that they all have, and that's a house on the cover. So let's take a look at all of those book covers again. Okay, well, one book proved me a liar, but I think the Kindle edition has a different cover. And, oh, look, a house on the cover. Not a liar after all. Let's run through surviving a haunted house, which are tips I've gathered from reading books and watching movies. Okay, so 1, if you have a basement, just move. The activity always happens in the basement. It doesn't matter if there's a light down there, it's just gonna go out when you need it the most. And don't even bother with a flashlight, because it's just gonna go out too. If you decide not to move and you want to stay there, just wall up that whole area and don't even go down there. Number 2, the same goes for attics. Because if the activity is not in the basement, it's in the attic. And sometimes it's in both. 3, if you hear noises in the night when you're alone or trying to sleep, like, just ignore it. Don't let curiosity win out. Just ignore it. And I think these noises include scratching, scraping, dragging, pounding, knocking, moaning, whispering, banging, footsteps, floorboards creaking, scuttling, doors opening, like any of it. Just ignore it all. If your kid's at your bed wanting something, like, just ignore it. 4, if your kid starts talking about their friend, chances are it's something creepy and you should believe them and just move out. 5, if you have a 2-story house, you're pretty much doomed. Because, it's like double the space to torture you. And whatever level you're on and hearing any of the noises that I talked about in number 3, like, chances are the stuff is happening on the level you're not on. So using the same advice as number 3, just ignore it. And number 6, which I think is the most important, if your house smells like rotting meat, move. I think those are the big ones. And hopefully that pretty much covers everything. So that's all I have for this video. I had a blast digging into haunted house and horror this month. It is one of my favorite subgenres, and I love picking up books and watching movies with this haunted house trope. March is Possession, which I'm equally excited about. Drop a comment below and let me know what your favorite haunted house book and or movie is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.